On stage with me, I have, as Meredith said, representatives from a few different industries. We're going to hear from each of them in turn, and then have a little bit of a panel discussion. So first, we have Michael Fitzpatrick, Head of Regulatory Advocacy at GE. Then Brian Hurst, the Vice President and Chief Analytics Officer of Exelon. Roger Jolles, Director of Marketing and Product Management, Telematics at Harman. And Dr. Karen Rubin, the Medical Director of the University of Virginia Center for Telehealth. And we will start with Mike Fitzpatrick.
It should be on already. It is on already. Great to be here. Thank you to CTIA for including this industry group. And what I'd like to do in my preliminary remarks is try to express how important it is to manufacturing, U.S. manufacturing, to General Electric, and to the U.S. industrial sector to be able to access adequate spectrum to develop 5G capable industrial Internet of Things networks. The promise of the industrial Internet of Things over the next 10 years is one of, I think, the most important national interests that we have, both in the United States and, frankly, globally. The economic growth that's going to result from the IoT has been assessed by various credible third-party analysts to be adding $14 to $15 trillion to global GDP by 2030, and the market to reach somewhere in the range of $150 billion in just 3 or 4 years. As we all know, there's going to be 50 billion interconnected devices in just a matter of years. And the promise of the industrial Internet of Things is so profound because it will lead not only to increased economic growth and job growth, optimized performance from machines, industrial machines and systems, but also to greater human safety. And I'll get into some of the use cases when we get into our discussion. But for oil and gas industry, for our customers and partners in the power generation and transmission industry, for the aviation industry, for the healthcare industry, for the transportation industry, both freight and commercial and consumer transportation. The power of big data, the power to use predictive analytics and edge computing to optimize performance and to improve safety is almost limitless. But the organs that are these machines, right, need blood to pump through them in order to operate. And that blood is spectrum. And so all of these industries that you see seated here, and I work with all of them as our customers and our colleagues in policy advocacy, are increasingly engaged in the policy discussion about spectrum access and also 5G, because we won't survive in terms of our strategic business planning and fulfilling the promise of IoT without it. And to be frank, while we will continue to partner closely with the commercial carriers, we're probably one of the largest customers of Verizon and AT&T. My iPhone is AT&T, my iPad is Verizon, and there's 125,000 other GE employees in the United States that have those as well. The reality is that these industries are going to need to have access to spectrum to develop their own TDD, LTE, and eventually 5G networks that is not going to be probably satisfied by the carriers. So we've got to find a balanced policy in this country that's going to accommodate everyone. I'll turn it over to my colleague. Well, there's my colleague from Exelon. This is the auto industry. We went up here alphabetically, but and I'll return to some of the use cases and some of the policy considerations that are so important to GE and our industrial customers when we get into the discussion.
Thank you so much, Brian.
All right. What I will tell you is I am a reforming consultant, so naturally I have to have some slides to get this going today. So what I'm going to share, though, is a little bit around how we think about innovation at Exelon, where I think 5G plays for us across the spectrum of our business in the enterprise and get started. So I do know that we are kind of one of the last couple of panels before beverages and demos, so we'll see if I can move quickly here. For those of you who don't know us, you can see in the background here a little bit about Exelon. The main message here is, we are #1 zero carbon provider in the U.S. We have a big portfolio of businesses. So we kind of really cover the entire energy value chain. And then where I spend most of my time in the Exelon utility business is really comprised of about 20,000 women and men that are serving 10 million customers across a 24,000-mile service territory that represents 6 utilities. So particularly for our folks that are in the field doing the hard work, they're doing a lot every day to kind of support all of our customers. Real quick, when we think about 5G and the possibilities, to me, it really sets us up well for our innovation agenda across Exelon. So if we think about the different parts of our value chain, from the regulated business where I spend a lot of time on the utility side, transmission distribution, to upstream on the generation side, and then certainly from an Exelon perspective, we need to think about new ways to drive growth, and innovation is one way for us to do that. Naturally, as an organization, a bunch of engineers, we have to have a process and methodology, and that's what you're seeing in front of you, not to stifle innovation. But what we do see, though, from a 5G perspective is it will help us think about new opportunities. And one of the ways we start driving innovation at the corporate level, both from a growth and a culture perspective, is through our accelerated process I mentioned on the previous slide. And specifically what we're doing there is we're trying to come up with new opportunities and products and or services to go to market with. Behind me here and in the slides in front of you are really just a few examples of what we've been focusing on from an innovation perspective. And so when you think about an energy company, you're probably thinking, well, why would you be thinking about 6th Sense or applications that could help support customers in the home trying to protect their children around what they're doing on the internet, or firewall? And this is just one example. So when we think about 5G, it opens up a whole new set of opportunities for us from a products and services perspective to build on the platform we developed as a company. We think about IoT, and I think of 5G. To me, 5G really is kind of like it's the extra large Dunkin' Donuts putting IoT on steroids or caffeine. I mean, there's a lot of endless possibilities, and we've been focusing a lot around using drone inspections, partnering with GE, very closely with the GE IoT Predicts platform, both on our generation and now on the utility side for analytics, where I spend most of my time. And we just see a significant opportunity if we can make this happen across the board. Not to mention, obviously, as Michael mentioned, all the jobs that will be created, significant opportunity for all of our customers and consumers that sit within our service territory. We do have some innovations that are coming soon, which I can't talk about today, I was told, but that will coincide with some things we're doing around the environmental impact of all of our choices that we make as we travel and traverse. So before I move to the utilities, to give you a sense of why 5G is important for us from a utility and utility future perspective, I did want to get some customers' points of view and try to raise a little levity here. So I did ask my kids about 5G, try to explain to them a little bit what it could mean. Naturally, my daughter went to the whole point of, well, I can get more on-demand, the best NHL hockey saves as a goalie. And she's even said, well, wait a minute, could I use on-demand in my helmet to try to capture concepts? And I said, no, but go ahead and try to think about it. Naturally, Pokemon is a big deal in my household a couple years ago. They were kind of, what's next in Pokemon and how does that happen? And my son, Charlie, was thinking, well, maybe if it's on-demand, ubiquitous, we could push out The Greatest Showman to everybody. He loves the messages that are in that particular show. So anyways, I didn't glean much from that exercise, as you can imagine. But what I will tell you, though, is on the utility side of the business, we recognize that we need to think about the utility future. And I'm not going to go through each slide here because I'm going to run out of time. But it's important to know that we recognize that our customers are expecting more of us. They're expecting us to deliver services just like they experience at other industries. And we know we need to be prepared to kind of support the evolution of the utility model. So what does that look like? So we know that as we start thinking about the utility model, that the technology is going to continue to evolve. We're already seeing that. And what does that mean for how we build out our capabilities? As we've been on a journey for some time across Exelon Utilities to invest in smart grid and smart meter capabilities, my role is to take all the data that we're harvesting and bring it in and make insights out of that data. But we also know that we need to use that as a platform to grow services. Michael hit a good point, which we're seeing a lot more edge processing, and you see that as we look at things like microgrid and how do we put sensors and data and pull that information back. 5G certainly is a way for us to get that done. We're going to see much greater requirements around real-time data, and that's where for us, as we look at 5G, but we also look at many other technologies in the mix, we've got to make sure that we hit the right balance of security, resiliency, the business case around serving our customers. Are we doing this in a way that allows us to provide affordable rates on the regulated side of the business? And then where I get really excited, certainly like a lot of folks, is around smart cities. And how does this all kind of fit together? And it really does create a lot of opportunities for us to look for new ways to serve our customers differently than we are today. And that is everything from playing a role in the solar side of the house. It's playing a role in the way we support electric vehicles and charging, and using insights near real time to make sure that we can set up a transactive relationship between producers and consumers. So in the future, as we think about it, if I'm someone that's producing on the grid, and I want someone else to buy as my neighbor, how do we get that done? And certainly near real-time technologies like 5G will allow us to be much more transactive in that relationship. And that kind of enables things like, again, IoT, blockchain, and other technologies. So I think we're just starting to scratch the surface on what this all means at the end of the day. And just, if you happen to be in DC and you want to hear more about what we're doing as an energy company around innovation, every year we get together and we have what we call our Energy Exelon Innovation Expo. It's a great opportunity to see, from our field workers to our call center agents to our engineers, you name it, everyone coming up with ideas around how we can reinvent our business, how we can support our customers differently, and what innovations can we build upon to actually take to market or drive efficiency within the operations. Predix is one great example of how we've been working closely together on that platform to kind of not only drive analytics, but think about the possibilities. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind, hang on to it for later, but it's an opportunity to learn a little more about what we're doing.
Great, thank you, Brian. Roger.
Okay, good afternoon. My name's Roger Jolles. I'm coming to you from the perspective of the automotive industry and am representing Harman International. You all probably know Harman from our work in the consumer space, JBL, Bang & Olufsen, Harman Kardon. That's part of our company. But what you probably don't know, Harman's one of the largest suppliers of automotive electronics, especially infotainment, digital clusters, as well as acoustical systems for automakers around the world. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is a paradigm shift in personal transportation as well as commercial transportation, and how 5G is going to enable that shift. About a year ago, we had our own tectonic shift at Harman. We were acquired by Samsung. As you probably know, Samsung is the #1 supplier of mobile phones, but they also supply many of the mobile network operators with infrastructure, the base stations. As a matter of fact, Samsung is working with Verizon here in the US, and will be rolling out the first 5G system. It'll be a point-to-point 5G system that's going to start in Sacramento and it'll be rolled out to additional cities. We've been actually testing that on the automotive side ourselves. So why is 5G important, and what is this paradigm shift? It's all about the autonomous car. Can you imagine no longer owning a car? Well, many of you, especially the younger folks in the room here who live here in the national capital, probably don't have a car anyway, but that's going to become the trend. You're going to order a car as a service, and the car will come and pick you up. It will disappear and park, or maybe you'll get a different car coming in, and you'll be able to sit in the car, enjoy the scenery, do your email or watch a movie, whatever it is, but it will all be done for you. And a critical component of that is going to be the enablement of safety and the situational awareness of the machine, the robot that controls that car. And so that's why 5G is important. 5G is going to bring a lot of new capabilities to the network. And let me talk about a few figures here. Speed is #1, bandwidth. We are going to see at least a 10 to 20x increase in bandwidth. We'll see somewhere between 10 and 20 gigabits per second. Now, relate that to what you're getting out of your home cable supplier. I get 75 megabits. I can see my films, my high-definition movies just fine. Why would you need that in a car? What was mentioned a minute ago, I think you said 50 billion. I've heard 80, I've heard 100. There is going to be an awful lot of IoT devices on the networks, and that's going to cause delays, traffic jams on the networks. And so 5G is going to help to cure that. It's going to allow a lot more devices on at one time. It will reduce latencies or delays that these devices need in order to access data. In the automotive space, why is it important? I don't need to have 4 HD TVs running the car. It's the matter of getting in and off on and off that network quickly, getting the data that you need. But also, a lot of new applications are going to be enabled on the connected car. The connected car will work with applications in the cloud that's going to control traffic, analytics that can really project when you're going to have problems with your car. The analytics can be done in the cloud. Today, the automotive manufacturers are looking to bring high bandwidth connectivity into cars in order to update all the computers in cars. Some cars, can you imagine, have up to 60 computers that control everything from the brakes to the infotainment system. And those computers all have software, and as you know, software has to be updated. And so today, the only way to do that is to drive into the dealership, hook up to a device, download the software. When it comes time for a recall, when there's been some kind of a defect, that is an absolute disaster. So by being able to do this over the air, the automakers are going to save a tremendous amount of money in warranty reserve costs. Let's talk about latency, the rapidity that the data can be moved from the car to the network. We're talking a 50x improvement, down to 1 millisecond of latency. That enables safety applications, something we in the industry call V2X, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to network communications can move to the 5G network. It's a lot less expensive than some of the legacy procedures and designs that have been put in before. That's going to be important, of course, to allow vehicles to avoid one another, keep safe, but we can also run additional applications on those V2V, V2X systems, such as running camera feeds from one vehicle to another. You need to pass a big truck, can't see, you can look at that truck's camera and understand that when it's clear. Another interesting application, being able to do peer-to-peer software sharing with other cars. What kind of software would you want to share with other cars? Well, high-definition maps, especially in the autonomous space, you're going to need to have maps that are much, much more accurate than what we've been using most recently. And by sharing those maps, you can avoid having to download through the network, congest the network, and pay for those additional pieces of data. Other things that 5G are going to bring are availability of the network, especially extended availability out as much as 4 times what we have today. Out on those fringes, we'll still be able to see speeds up to 100 megabits per second. So that's another benefit. There's many other things that we can see bringing that 5G brings to the automotive industry. It is an enabling technology for our future. We're building out. We see around the world other countries are building out. In fact, one country that's most notable is China. It's one of their checkoff points on their 5-year plans. China is looking to make 5G a strategic differentiator for its infrastructure in its country. We need to do the same thing, and we need to do it by rushing these systems out and minimizing the amount of regulation that has to go in place that increases costs and slows down the system. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but by no means least, Dr. Rubin.
Well, thank you. And could I get the clicker for the, and if you could tee up my slides, please. I am a teacher, so I've got slides. Thank you. And hopefully I'll do this right. Okay, so it's really a privilege to talk to you all about the connected healthcare ecosystem. But what's key for this group in particular is a connected healthcare system needs connections, right? Needs telecommunications. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about telehealth. What is telehealth? It's the delivery of patient care, consultations, follow-up visits, health professional education, remote patient monitoring supported by telecommunications technologies. And that can include live interactive video conferencing, connecting patients with providers, store and forward, which is the asynchronous transfer of medical images and information, remote patient monitoring in multiple different venues, and mobile health applications, which really can include a host of all of the above. So many of you may have heard of Hugo Gernsback, for whom the Hugo Awards were named, and he was the editor of Radio News Magazine, and in 1924, that's the cover, predicting relatively contemporary telemedicine. And fast forward to 2018, where we have remote examination devices that can wirelessly connect patients with their providers, and remote examination tools that provide EKGs. I was recently in Africa on safari, and I looked down and I could see that my mother, my 95-year-old mother, was in atrial fibrillation. That took a quick call to my sister, got her to the hospital, got her taken care of. I mean, it's incredible what can be done. So the benefits accrue to patients by giving timely, convenient access to potentially locally unavailable services and available services, improves chronic disease management, reduces the burden and cost of transportation for care. At our UVA program, we've saved patients more than 17 million miles of driving for access to healthcare services in Virginia. For physicians and other health professionals, it allows them access to consultative services and supports team-based care delivery models. Hospital systems, it facilitates appropriate transfers. decreases hospital readmissions, for which hospitals are penalized using remote monitoring tools, and for communities, it enhances partner hospital viability, especially our rural hospitals, and as such supports the local workforce. We are an aging population. By 2030, more than 71 million Americans will be older than 65, and 50% of them suffer from, or I should say us, suffer from at least one chronic illness. More than 75% of healthcare costs are spent on chronic illness. So why not use connected healthcare tools? And I will say, healthcare doesn't just happen in the healthcare provider's facility. It is every day how we manage ourselves as patients and how we care for our patients. So the home and the workplace are ideal places to incorporate sensor and remote monitoring technologies. And this is just an example of artificial pancreas technologies that rely on wireless technologies for constant feedback and predictive analytics as well. There are a lot of connected care models, health systems, including academic medical centers, classical hub and spoke models, the Veterans Health Administration, Department of Defense, NASA, telemedicine services companies, retail clinics, workplace clinics, school-based clinics, EMS telemedicine, how appropriate for this discussion, and direct-to-consumer models of healthcare. For me, I thought the light at the end of the tunnel was positive public policy allowing for enhanced reimbursement. That was my light at the end of the tunnel, except it turned out to be the oncoming freight train of consumer demand for access to healthcare using remote technologies. So for us at the University of Virginia, our Center for Telehealth very much aligns with our health system mission. Clinical care in more than 60 different subspecialties we offer. We align with research initiatives within the health system, such as in devices and sensor technologies, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, health services research, and our teaching as well, teaching missions in telehealth, patient education, and health professional education. We connect to more than 150 sites across Virginia. There are policy issues why we just connect in Virginia, and we do international telehealth as well. We track outcomes very carefully because it's truly important as we try to convince the Congressional Budget Office that telehealth is a service worth covering in Medicare. So we look at acute stroke intervention, and we actually, in rural critical access hospitals, can provide the same level of care to acute stroke victims as we provide to patients within our own emergency department in Charlottesville. That's transformational. High-risk obstetrics telemedicine. We've reduced newborn ICU hospital days and reduced preterm deliveries. We screen patients for diabetic retinopathy, the #1 cause of blindness in working adults. Remote monitoring partnerships in the home requiring wireless technologies. We've reduced hospital readmissions by more than 40%. And as Senator Hassan mentioned earlier, psychiatry, mental health services, and addiction services are an important element of what we do. And I just want to reinforce to everyone, the whole reason we do this is to improve the lives of our patients.
Great, thank you so much. So, healthcare, automotive, energy, industry, we have a broad range of industries represented here, and so I'm going to ask some pretty broad questions. And what I want to start with is, what do you, when you think about your day-to-day, when you think about your industries, what are you most excited about? What is 5G going to, really make a change for you that you're most excited about? And we'll start, Michael, with you.
Sure, thank you so much. Look, I think we all like the same things about 5G, which is low latency, gigabit speeds, high capacity. The applications for the industrial Internet of Things are built around 4K video. They are built around intense sensing environments. We're using infrared, you're using X-ray, you're using ultrasound and other sophisticated sensing technologies to burrow into the machine or the infrastructure to look for defects or to assess it. And that requires moving terabytes of information over time, relatively short periods of time, and continuously. It's also moving into remote control. So we're moving into an era where we will be able to remotely control an offshore oil rig, or at least in a redundant way to the human beings on the oil rig, a nuclear facility, a nuclear power plant, pipelines. So there are incredible opportunities for optimizing operations and increasing safety, but they rely on these core 5G characteristics, right? So the question for, I think, us in GE is, how are we going to access at an affordable price, secure high capacity, high speed spectrum. And I know we're going to talk in a few minutes, I think, about some of the policy implications of that. So I'll stick to the case studies. But for GE, just to add to a few of the exciting ones that you've heard from the panel today, you know, we are working with airlines and airframe manufacturers. We make jet engines to develop sophisticated technologies that will allow a jet airplane, as it's approaching the airport and taxiing to the gate, to be throwing off information from the auxiliary power unit, from the flight data recorder, from all the sensors on the plane, so that in real time, at the edge there, that information can be crunched and assessed, and there can be determinations made that go to safety and maintenance and operational improvement. We can throw that information into the cloud and start to use predictive analytics to think into the future about that plane and how it should best be used and when it needs to come in for maintenance and maybe when it needs to be put down temporarily, okay? So that's one example of how this works. At the Port of LA, Port of Los Angeles, the largest port in the United States, 40% of our commercial goods come through that port. We are working with the Port of LA on a sophisticated port optimization software package that requires immense amounts of data. It pulls together shippers, freight rail, 18,000 truckers, and 9 terminal operators, and allows them to orchestrate their activities together to increase throughput by 8 to 12% at the port. That's billions of dollars of economic value every year, okay? And the reason we can do that is because we have, or will have when it goes to its predictive analytical version 3.0, a private network that's going to allow all these people to operate in a secure and in a certain way, because that is what is essential. Here's, and I'll finish with this comparison. This really encapsulates the promise of the industrial Internet of Things. If the Port of LA were otherwise to try to increase its throughput by 10%, it would have to build a new terminal. It would have to expand its facilities. Well, that would cost billions of dollars. It's not even clear that it's possible because they have sort of expanded to the edges of their multiple 7,500 acre facility, and it would involve extensive environmental permitting, et cetera. It would take a long time. Instead of spending billions of dollars in a decade to do it, they can spend millions of dollars in partnership with GE, and within 2 years, they can be increasing operational throughput by 10%. That is the power of big data, and that is why we need to think so carefully about how we construct policy in this country to include all of the stakeholders, okay, to fulfill the real promise of the industrial Internet of Things, or the broader Internet of Things.
Thank you so much. Roger, same question. What are you most excited about?
Same question. So from my perspective, it isn't so much the technology that's exciting, it's what the technology is actually enabling. How many of you spend time here in DC jammed up in traffic on the Beltway, or those of you that might be from the West Coast, the San Diego Freeway? When we move to the autonomous world, you'll be able to get some of that time back. You still have to make the commute in many cases, but you'll be able to spend that time doing other things. Maybe it's work, maybe it's pleasure, but you don't have to sit there with frustration and wasting your life away. So that's what 5G means to me.
That's great. Thank you.
I mean, a couple quick examples. So one use case I didn't mention earlier, but it's very central to everything we do is safety. So when we put our women and men out in the field, either in storm restoration or in advance of storm, or just normal maintenance, there's a lot of safety implications. So I mean, to the degree we can actually start to put, using wearable technology and bring back real-time data, which we started to investigate, but we don't have the bandwidth to kind of pull that off in a way. We can push information out there that helps our folks prepare for the jobs at hand. That's a big game changer for us on behalf of all our people. The other side of it too is, kind of alluded earlier when we think about utility future, but all the distributed energy resources out there add significant more complexity to the network. And we think about things like transactive energy, we need that real-time capabilities. So 5G adds another tool in our toolbox to consider as we think about building out the network for the future, just like we're trying to build our utility future. And then the last point I would mention is when we think about taking for granted electricity, you go back to your hotel room or your house at night, you flip on the switch and the lights just work, electricity flows and the gas flows to your home. This is a real opportunity for us to see all of the residents that we serve within our service territories to have ubiquitous communications. I grew up in a dinky town in Michigan. We didn't have access. We had the old dial switch and stuff like that. But just the fact that, it kind of scares me, my mom being on Periscope would actually be kind of scary. But the fact that we can now offer that reach, and we can start to see underserved communities get more access to technology information, it's a significant opportunity for everybody.
Dr. Rubin.
I, take that and expand it to healthcare. As far as I'm concerned, 5G networks will allow us to, provide better services for patients, individual patients, healthcare systems, and help us to manage populations. Think about pandemic flu. Think about the opportunities to track diseases as they are coming in. Think about pharmacies being able to upload information to the cloud that helps us to analyze and understand that there's an outbreak. Is it Ebola? Is it flu? What is it? How do we manage our patients, keep them healthy in their home settings? It's all of healthcare, quite frankly, and I'm thrilled and excited about this technology.
That's wonderful. So a lot of today has been spent talking about what we need to do to get to 5G, to deploy 5G. What are some of the challenges that your industries are facing in rolling out and then taking advantage of some of this technology?
Sure. Well, I've alluded to it twice, and I'm going to come back to it a third time. It's access to spectrum. And so if I could, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to describe the challenge of spectrum access for the industrial and critical infrastructure sectors, and frankly to respond to a panel earlier of some of the spokespeople for the carriers. Look, as we do LTE networks and 4G, and as we move to 5G, all of our customers and GE, and in that I include the oil and gas industry, the power sector, the aviation sector, freight rail, maritime ports, and hospitals, we are going to be working with the carriers to access spectrum. And we'll be doing that in lots of bands, because let's also be clear, the group that owns most all the spectrum are the carriers, and that's the way our system works. But we now have an opportunity in this country in a single band, the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS, to open up the opportunities beyond the carriers, including the carriers, but beyond the carriers, to all of us and more. And I represent an industrial Internet of Things coalition that includes about 40% of the US economy, oil and gas, power, freight rail, maritime ports, manufacturing. And we're advocating to preserve some access to small area licensing in that band. It's ideal for the kinds of LTE and eventually 5G applications that we're going to run with our customers. We need to be able to self-provision and to build out our own private networks around critical infrastructure facilities. We need the resilience, we need the certainty over time, we need the high capacity throughput, the low latency. We're talking about mission critical operations here. And our past experience and our belief in the future is that we cannot solve all those needs simply through commercial relationships with the carriers, because they have a different business plan, and they should. But it doesn't comport with what industrials and critical infrastructure need. So we're fighting hard to maintain access to some level of small area licensing. Carriers can still bid on the small area licensing. I heard before, the discussions about some of the complexities of that. Yeah, it will be complex in a way, but the cost of those complexities will yield massive social benefits if we can build out these private networks and fulfill the full promise of the IoT. So we believe that there will be a holistic policy compromise that will allow all of the important stakeholder groups in the country to get some value out of this band. Everybody's going to have to give something up versus the status quo. We certainly know we are going to. But the important thing is to allow everybody to have access to this. I'll finish by saying spectrum is not a commodity. Spectrum is a tool to achieve national policy goals, and our country needs to think more and more about that as policy making. We really need to use spectrum to achieve major national policy goals.
Roger.
So in parallel, one of the big concerns that we have is the rapidity that these networks will be rolling out. After all, a car is a moving device, and if we're only going to say these advanced networks in urban areas, then we're not going to be able to realize the full benefit of autonomous vehicles out in the suburban and the rural areas. And so it needs to roll out, and that takes a lot of money. Perhaps part of the approach to that is to allow smaller network operators to have spectrum in areas that might not be served by the larger operators. We also have some challenges on the implementation in the car. To start, the car can move as fast as here in this country, 80 miles an hour, and overseas we see speed limits faster than that. There are challenges with taking advantage of some of the high-speed capabilities of 5G in what's called the millimeter wave bands. Parts of those challenges are around the switch off from one cell to another. Part of it has to do with antennas. Today, the antennas on the car for connected vehicles is a shark fin. You see it in the middle, usually in the back of the roof. Those are going to be disappearing because we need as many as 18 different antennas on cars to fully realize all the connectivity. That can get very, very ugly. And so we're working on ways to put together what we call conformal antennas, which are invisible. They sit below the body panels. I mentioned before that Harman was acquired by Samsung, and it's technology like this, the chip technology, the antenna technology that they've developed for the mobile phone area, that we're going to be able to take advantage of and port it out to the automotive sector.
Thank you so much.
All right, if I've learned anything over the years, is let the policy stuff in X-Line with our experts that really deal with policy. But what I will tell you is that as I think about some of the steps ahead, I think really when you think about even painting the picture around the smart cities or the utility future, it does require a commission in each of our respective service territory states that are open to how this needs to evolve. And a little bit of a shout out, I would say, to Illinois and the commission, Chairman Sheehan. They're really looking at what does the next grid look like for the role of the utilities within Illinois and how that unfolds longer term. We've just seen recently, for example, a bill signed last week, I think it was HB 1451, that now opens up speed of gateway, if you will, for deploying the networks required and the infrastructure to support 5G. So you see Illinois kind of taking a step forward. And like I said, I think it's really part of the climate, and it's beholden on all of us to kind of tell the right story in a way that continues to focus how we can serve our customers better.
Well, so from my perspective, healthcare is an incredibly regulated service, and we have many, many challenges in telehealth. I will say that there are probably at least 20 different federal agencies that have some role to play in telemedicine and telehealth. So, there's issues related to payment, issues related to licensure. Payment is really important, actually, because Medicare still only pays for telemedicine services provided to rural patients, not for anybody else. And the definition of rural doesn't comport with the other federal agency definitions of rural. So these are barriers that we need to try to all address together. Then we have the FDA, which weighs in on devices and applications, and we have the FCC, which has been amazing with their connected health initiatives. So, and U.S. Department of Agriculture, wires the rural farms, that we've been funded by them, and NTIA. We need to do this together. We don't need to be working in silos. It's critically important that we advance this together. And I will also give a special thanks to the FCC because the National Broadband Plan actually had Chapter 10, which was devoted to healthcare. So I think as we do this, we need to do it all together.
Thank you so much. All right, so 30 seconds,
Yep.
Final thoughts on 5G.
Great. So my final thought on 5G is this. I heard earlier in the earlier panel a conception that the way you get to 5G is to have sort of the carriers build it out. And I think the carriers are going to be an essential part of building 5G out. We have a little different take on what 5G, how you're going to get to 5G. We believe it's going to occur over many bands of spectrum, right? Not a single band. And the carriers will be the key player there. But it's also going to involve all of us. It's going to involve industrial America, critical infrastructure, the medical industry, commercial real estate, hospitals and resorts, rural broadband. We are all going to together build out a 5G network in this country and lead the world. And in my view, it's better to harness 1,000 players than a handful of players in doing that. And so that's our conception of 5G. We're all trying to head to the same place fast.
So for us, building out that network becoming a national policy major strategy for our country, and being able to do that rapidly without burdening the infrastructure with overregulation and additional costs. The sooner we can get this thing rolled out, the sooner we can come into the autonomous vehicle world, which I think is going to be very important for our country at large.
Absolutely. So a whole lot of new opportunities and applications for us to consider. It becomes another tool in our toolbox as we think about building out the energy company of the future, and particularly around utilities. But a lot of reliance and speed to market, I think, is going to be really key in how we continue to move that agenda forward.
I agree. We do this together.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.